Good evening. I'd like to again welcome all of you and thank you for joining us for night 2 of our mission. We do have one more night tomorrow night as well. So I want to thank you again for coming out on this beautiful weather we're having and a beautiful night. But it's really good for all of us to be here together. And I know last night a lot of people really appreciated it. Even my sister who watched online, she said she learned so much. I'm like, Lorraine, I teach this stuff all the time. It's always good when someone else says it. So anyway, but I'm glad y'all are here tonight. And at the end of tonight, we will have a basket by the baptismal font. If you'd like to donate to help us offset some of the costs of bringing Steve here, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you, and welcome, Steve.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you were applauding because I was going to start talking or because he was stopping. Yes to both. Let's just bring ourselves in the rooted presence of our scriptures. This from the gospel according to John. I have given them the glory you gave me, so that they may be one, as we are one, I in them and you in me, that they may be brought to perfection as one, that the world may know that you sent me and that you loved them even as you loved me. And pray with me, if you would, this mission prayer. Loving Christ, bread of life, wine of compassion, you broke yourself open and poured yourself out to become one with us, for us, in us, and among us. Open our hearts to love as you love, to forgive as you forgive, to serve as you serve, and to break ourselves open and pour ourselves out for others, bringing your real presence to all God's people all the time. Amen. So, oftentimes in our Catholic tradition, we get very intimate and personal with Eucharist. And that's fair. That's appropriate. I'm not suggesting we oughtn't. But we forget that it's communal. It's communion. It's social. And it calls us into unity, calls us into that one body of Christ. To recognize that it's not just about me and Jesus, it's about the great oneness of the body of Christ. In the Greek, the word Christo, right, means the anointed one. Jesus Christ, the anointed one. And in our Western tradition, our Western culture, we have a tendency to define the one as the individual, the anointed individual person. But when Jesus breaks himself open and pours himself out and says, do this in memory of me, let me be one with you as I am one with the Father. Let us all be one together. He's calling us to a different, larger definition of the anointed one. And it's the whole, the one, the team idea, right? This idea of we are one. Many parts, Paul says, but one body. In 1985, John Hughes made a film called The Breakfast Club. You seen it? It's great. It's a great film. And the premise is pretty simple. 5 high school kids in suburban Chicago get, I want to use the word sentenced, but they have to serve detention on a Saturday in the library. So they come together, but they all come from different worlds. They all represent a different faction or a different population, if they will. And they go, one is the brainiac, nerd guy, and one is the stereotypical athlete, jock, and one is the prom queen, super popular girl. One is the dropout, the burnout, what we think of in those times is the druggie, and one is sort of the artist, the individualist who doesn't really seem to connect with anybody. And they all come into this library to serve detention on a Saturday, and they're given an assignment. They each have to write an essay on who do you think you are. Now, the day starts out with a lot of antagonism. They don't like each other at all. They feel threatened by each other. They all feel very righteous in who they are and who their people are that they connect with. And they see the faults and the flaws in one another. But as the day goes on, things come out. And there's a very pivotal point where they share their brokenness, where they admit to one another why they're here, what they did to get detention, what went wrong, what went off the rails, what life is like at home. They start to admit their brokenness, their hurt. And in that vulnerability, because when they come in, of course, they don't want anyone to know where they hurt. But when they open up and show their wounds to one another, a bond forms. It's a wonderful bond that forms between the five of them when they realize that they really have a lot more in common than they have apart from each other. So they form this great community, these five people with very diverse backgrounds and interests and coming together. And they build this bond. But then toward the end of the day, one of them asks the pivotal question: what's going to happen on Monday? What's going to happen on Monday? When we're not in this library together and we're back in school, and we're each with our own group of friends, will you say hi to me? And the one kind of geek nerd kid asks the real popular girl, when you see me in the hall and you are with your friends, what's going to happen on Monday? Will you say hi? Or will you pretend to not know me and not recognize me? Will it go back to how it was? And I think it's such a critical question that we have to ask ourselves in our faith. We come here on Sunday and we celebrate Eucharist together, and we build community and we love each other, and it's wonderful. And you guys do it at such a high level here, where there's just positivity and joy, and we leave. And the question is, what's going to happen on Monday? Because that leads to this question: where does Eucharist stop? We are so, in my diocese of Green Bay a few years ago, the diocese got all wrapped up in the question, the technical question: where does Eucharist start? When does it happen? Should we be ringing bells at consecration? At what point during the process? And how should we posture ourselves for that magic moment? When does it start? When does this great consecration actually happen? And I was sitting in the background of this conversation thinking, well, that's fine. But isn't the greater question, when does Eucharist stop? When does it stop being the very substance and the very essence of Christ's real presence among us? When we swallow? When we return to our pews? When we're back out in our cars? When we fall asleep? When we're done with the digestive process? When does it stop? And honestly, judging from some of the conversations that have happened that I've been in the crossfire of in the gathering space of my own church, I'm not sure that Jesus makes it out of the pew sometimes. Because the reality is, Eucharist stops being Eucharist. It stops being the real presence of Christ's substance and essence. It stops when we decide to stop it. It stops when the transformation doesn't take place within us. Remember last night I said 3 phases to Eucharist. The first one is what happens at Mass, wave 1. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's glorious, and it's worth coming together and celebrating. Second one, the transformation that happens in our heart, changing our self-identity into this body and blood, this real presence of Christ in the world. And then the third wave, what happens on Monday, what we take out into the world, how we live it, how we bring it to others. Last night we talked about how can we bring the real presence of Christ to people who aren't Catholic or aren't here with us. Is it okay if they're here for wave 1 and participate in that? And then I dodged that dicey question and said, but in wave 2 and wave 3, we can bring the real presence of Christ's essence and substance, that one body of Christ, to every single person in the world. If we allow ourselves to enter into the mystery and not simply treat it as an object. We're so tempted in our Catholic tradition to be so in awe of the object that we objectify, or we're at risk of objectifying the real presence of Christ, the objectifying the Eucharist itself and seeing it only as a noun, not as an experience that we encounter and share with one another, not as a call that we enter and become. To understand that Eucharist is not simply some sort of Jesus pill. My son Alex, when I told him I was writing this book, dared me to find a way to use the word Jesus pill. And so this was my tribute to Alex. He's a rocket scientist. To understand that Eucharist is not simply some sort of Jesus pill, it helps to first expand our understanding of God. And second, to re-examine our relationship with this infinite, life-giving oneness in love we call God. Let me pump the brakes for a minute and roll on to the shoulder. It sounds audacious, doesn't it? Expand our understanding of God. Whom are we kidding? I can't even understand the popularity of TikTok. It seems pointless. Albert Einstein reportedly said he wanted only to know the mind of God. When I first learned this, I thought that would be a worthwhile life pursuit. Later, as age introduced me to more wisdom, I realized Einstein was joking. He was being facetious. Even he, one of the most brilliant minds in human history, recognized that God is unknowable. But in life and if life and death teach us anything, it's that unknowable does not mean unbelievable. The most divine things in life are not meant to be known. They can only be experienced. Sunrises and sunsets, the feeling while standing on top of a mountain, a beer with a friend, falling in love, forgiveness, bare feet in a saltwater surf, the way music stirs the soul, ice cream on a Sunday afternoon, the giggle of a toddler. These things and so much more, in fact, everything good in life, are not really meant to be known or even understood. They are meant to be experienced. Such is the gift of our humanity, the sacred gift of life itself. Such is the very real presence of Christ in our lives and the heart of mystery in Eucharist. Like love, it is not meant to be known or understood. It is meant to be encountered, entered, and experienced. We never grow deeper or love more by knowing more. We do so by virtue of our heartfelt, soul-stirring experiences and relationships. This is something the saints and mystics understand intuitively that the rest of us keep struggling to figure out. We can't learn to swim by thinking about it, reading about it, or even praying about it. At some point, we have to jump in the water, splash feverishly, and find ourselves in over our heads. That's just how life works. It's also how love works, and it's exactly what Jesus did. As Christ, the very incarnation of God's own self, plunged completely into the full experience of life, so must we, as beings created in God's own image. At some point, we learn to recognize that rolling up our sleeves and plunging both arms into the clay of life, just as God did in our creation story, is a very sacred endeavor. We are not here as consumers of life, but as co-creators of life, called to break ourselves open, pour ourselves out, and share ourselves abundantly. Indeed, it really is better to give than to receive. Do this in memory of me. One of the very common themes in my preaching and in my writing that I keep emphasizing is the direction of God's energy in our lives. We are so conditioned, I guess, in our world to be concerned about how our life experience is affecting us. The people that I'm going to meet today, the things I have to do, how am I going to feel about that? How will it affect me? But that's not the direction of Eucharist, and that's not the direction in which Christ lived his life. That direction is not concerned with how I am affected by my life experience, but rather how I am affecting others through my life experience. What is the direction in which the love of God is coming to me and working and flowing through me to touch the lives of other people? There's a story you're all familiar with when the Pharisees bring the woman caught in adultery to Jesus. And they ask him, what are we going to do with her? And they set up what we would call a forced choice fallacy. These are your options, Jesus. Follow the law and stone her to death. Or just, willy-nilly forgive her, be compassionate and warm and fuzzy, and send her on her way. Those are the options. In our world today, we would define one option as the conservative option. We need to follow the letter of the law like this. And we would view the other option as the liberal option. We could be compassionate, give her a break. She's had a hard life. Don't judge her. And those are both at loggerheads. But Jesus, of course, responds by getting down and drawing in the dirt. And I think that action of getting down and drawing in the dirt is important, and it's intentional, because what's he doing? He's getting down into the clay. Yesterday, I introduced you to the word Adama, the essence of life that flows. The root of the word Adam. in the first person created with God's love, made from the earth, breathed the gift of life. And he gets down, he draws in the dirt, and then of course he comes up and he gives us his answer, which is let the one who's without sin cast the first stone. What he's doing is he's telling us there's a third way. There's a third way. And the third way is to be less concerned about what everyone else is doing. Be less concerned about her being caught in adultery and what that means. And be more concerned about who you are and what's going on with you and getting your own heart right. Be concerned with how you're affecting others. Be less concerned with how she or others are affecting you. Be more concerned with how you are affecting others. And it's the difference between reconciliation and resolution. We want resolution to all of our problems. We want them solved. We need to get this matter resolved. Jesus, is it A or is it B? We need to resolve this. But resolution often leaves brokenness. Someone's going to be hurt. There's still going to be fracture in the community. On Sunday, I told you about the time I wrecked my dad's car. And resolution would have been, Steve, you got to fix it. You got to pay to get it fixed. I'm not going to allow you to use a car until it's corrected. That would have resolved the issue. He could have expressed anger with me. That would have been resolution for him. But it would have left brokenness. Brokenness in our relationship. Brokenness in my willingness to be honest and safe with him. But instead, he chose the path of reconciliation. Let's return this to wholeness and bring it around. We seek reconciliation with and through Eucharist to bring a fractured self and a fractured world back into wholeness. And we have to ask ourselves, are we ready to do that? Are we ready to choose wholeness over brokenness? I wanted to share with you a little story from Jesus Wears Socks with Sandals. It's called Go Mennonite Guy. The Mennonite guy has the best tomatoes. Normally, I'm not a big fan of the love apples, unless I'm squeezing them from a bottle onto a burger or spooning them spiced over pasta. I'm typically not interested. But the optics of the Mennonite guy's tomatoes are irresistible. They are metaphors for something, everything that is or can be right in the world. My weekly stroll past the stand he tends with his ruddy-cheeked daughters is a favorite farmer's market ritual for me. These earnest, sincere people with these amazing tomatoes have the power to stop time. Directly across from the Mennonite guy is a stand run by a throwback hippie couple selling organic vegetables. They are rare gems of a different sort, with an unwavering dedication to ideals long since abandoned by most of their generation. They pay a price for their convictions, however. Their bounty is not as robust as the high-yield farmers. They offer more root vegetables such as leeks, radishes, and carrots, giving their display a more earthy tone. I love their soft-spoken, gentle conversation and unassuming smiles. I relish the moment each Saturday morning when I occupy the poetic space between the Mennonite guy and the hippie couple. They come from vastly different worlds, yet have so much in common. It's a fascinating human harmony of contrasts and synergies. Both are rooted in bygone eras, clinging religiously to their values and resisting what the world thinks of as progress. Go Mennonite guy and his ruddy-cheeked daughters. Go hippie couple. Although I know neither of them, I am so thankful for both of them. Secretly, I envy their convictions and honor their values, even as I choke on the hypocrisy of my own unwillingness to give up ESPN or cheese curds. These are but two stands in the sea of diversity that has become my local farmer's market. The rows of white awnings shade a potpourri of humanity created in God's image and likeness, extended Hmong families, Native Americans, Indian immigrants, and Hispanic Americans, all peppered among Euro-American old-timers who farmed in the area for generations. Flowing shoulder to shoulder in a lazy river of folk in all shapes, sizes, ages, and colors, as it meanders from stand to stand. They continuously get in each other's way, clogging arteries with neighborly conversation and tripping over strollers. No one seems to mind. No one is in a hurry as they sip coffee and eat spring rolls. This is the poetry of the farmer's market. It renews my spirit and inspires my belief in humanity. It also leaves me wondering why we can't live like this all the time. If thousands of people with diverse histories and stories can crowd together each week in a downtown farmer's market, what stops us from doing so elsewhere and always? This may be the closest thing I know to actually being church beyond the church. It is a common humanity, void of pretension, each person created as a unique self-portrait of the Creator, and all gathered by a common need to be nourished. At the end of the day, the Mennonite guy, the hippie couple, and the Catholic deacon dad standing between them have nothing and everything in common. Can we carry the spirit of the farmer's market beyond the market? If not, the experience has been diminished. Can we carry the spirit of the church and of Eucharist beyond the church? If not, the experience has been diminished. We're called to this wholeness when two things that are opposed to each other, whether it's someone who's adhering to the old world standards of a Mennonite/Amish religion, and these throwback hippies growing organic vegetables. If people, when we're faced with things that seem to contradict, we have two options. One is friction, the other is fusion. So often, we keep choosing friction. And we forget it's a choice. We don't have to argue with everyone. We don't have to look for divisions. We don't have to rub up in a way that is annoying and just heats up the conversation. We can choose fusion. And all of the life-giving forces in our creation are fusion forces. The sun, which makes life possible, is a fusion reactor. Photosynthesis is a fusion reaction of things that are different and apart coming together to create, nourish, and sustain life. What happened in the movie The Breakfast Club, 5 people, very different, coming together. At the end of the movie, they don't write 5 separate essays, who do you think you are? They decide to write one collective essay, one story that is common to all. That's what Eucharist calls us to, this unitive oneness, this great fusion of humanity, bringing the grand diversity of God's great imagination into wholeness, and all of us being so much better for it. The the psychologist and philosopher Ken Wilber studied all of the ologies, right? Anthropology, sociology, psychology, theology, spirituality. And he noticed that in all of these different studies of humanity, they all have some sort of stages of development. Some have 7 stages, some have 5, some have 6, but he said that all of these different studies of human nature, whether it's the individual or the culture as a whole, they all identify stages of development. And then he overlaid them. He said, what happens if we stack them all up? Are there commonalities to those stages of development? And he identified 4. The first is egocentric, individualism. And you know what? That's how we all live up until about the age of 5. I mean, when you're 3 years old, it's my toy. It's all about me. It's and it's individualistic. The second is ethnocentrism, or tribalism, to me and my people. The third is pluralism. Oh, it's not just my people versus your people. It's all of us, my people and your people. And then the fourth is universalism. Now, I'm going to walk through these and break them out for you a little bit and develop them. But Wilber claims that so much of the division and the friction in our world is because whatever stage you're at in your own perspective and development, you think you've arrived. You don't know there's more. So if you're living from a anchoring point of individualism or egocentrism, you think that that's how the world works. How does everyone not see it that way? But if you're living at a place of pluralism, you don't understand why these other people can't see that they have nothing to be afraid of. You don't have to fear other people because they're not in your tribe. You can join them together. Now, Wilber claims that in our human development right now, in the Western world, about half of the folks have moved into pluralism or even into universalism, and half are stuck back in ethnocentrism and egocentrism. Now he makes a point of saying that when we grow from one to the other, we don't leave the previous behind, we bring it with us, right? We grow, we expand. So just because you've moved to a later stage of human development doesn't mean that you stop being yourself, that you sacrifice your individual or your family. It might help if I break these out, getting ahead of myself a little bit. We're going to look at what each one focuses on, the relationship with others that each has, and then the relationship with God, and ultimately how it thinks of salvation in the world. So the first one, egocentrism. Really, when you're living an egocentric life, your primary concern is me. I care mostly about me, how the world affects me, how public policy affects me. It's really all about me. Your relationship with others is one of I versus others. Other people have value so far as they positively affect me. The relationship with God becomes one of God as rewarder and punisher. What do I get out of my relationship with God? Will it be a reward or will it be a punishment? Where does that go? And then the final one on salvation is I get to heaven. And I'll talk to these people. They come to our churches, at least my church, maybe not here, but it's like the only reason I do this is so that I can get to heaven. The only reason I go to communion is so that I can get to heaven. It's sort of a self-serving salvation in that way. When we move to ethnocentrism, it becomes more tribal. So now I care about me, but I also care about my people, my family, the people who are like me, the people I identify with because they're like me. And so we start to view our relationship with others as I and we, my people, versus other people. So it's like, in Green Bay, of course, we have the Polish Catholic Church, and then we had the Belgian Catholic Church, and then we had the German Catholic, all within like 6 blocks of each other, right? Super, super tribal. This is my people. And so we care about me and my people, and we start to see our relationship with others in terms of us versus them. It's really hard to have a constructive conversation about things like immigration as long as we are anchored in an us versus them mentality. Those people might harm us. That goes nowhere. In terms of our relationship with God, we start to buy into this idea of chosen people, God's master and subjects, and I want to be among the chosen people. So you will hear things, some religions say, there's a total of 260 people who will be saved, or whatever the magic number is, and be among the chosen. And a lot of times in our own one of the things that our Catholic Church is wrestling with all of these years after Vatican II is this idea that you don't necessarily have to be Catholic to be saved, whatever that means, that God loves everybody. And that makes a lot of people itchy. Because if you're stuck in an egocentric or ethnocentric mentality, it's like it's us against them. They have to be like us or they're wrong. It's like, not so much necessarily. And then salvation, I said, the chosen, those who are chosen then get to heaven. The focus of when we move to pluralism, this idea of pluralism, it moves to care for your people too. Yes, I am me and I have my family, I have my community, I have my people, and I love them and I care for them, but I'm not opposed to you. I care for you and your people too, every bit as much. So you can see the tension about immigration when we have half of a nation saying, it's us versus them, keep them out, don't let them come. We can't have them, they are a threat to us. Look out for ourselves first. And then you have half the people, if Wilbur's correct, who sort of moved on to pluralism, say, wait. There are people created in God's image and likeness too. And just because and they have value and dignity and we can care for them. We can care for them as well. So the relationship with others is then not I or we versus others, it's I and we with others. When we talk about our relationship with God, we start to realize all people, everyone's a child of God. We're all children of God, all of us. God created every human person in God's own image and likeness. All of them. And we can start to see that every person is imbued with sacred dignity and value that we seek to honor in our lives. So we start to open ourselves to this idea that everyone gets to heaven, whatever that means. But when we move to universalism, which if you really look at the Gospels, this is where Jesus lived, and this is where he invites us to live. This is what Eucharist is all about, calling us to this universalist perspective that's all-inclusive, where the whole idea of who we care for is all God's people. We care for all God's people. And the idea of I versus them, I with them, melts away, and our relationship with others moves into the I amness. Going back to Moses and the Exodus story, meeting God on the mountain, saying, who shall I say you are? And he says, I am. I am that I am. Jesus asks his disciples, who do people say I am? I am. I am, John tells us, that he quotes Jesus saying, I am the bread of life. This is me. I break myself open, I pour myself out so that you can be one with me. You can enter into this I am, many parts, one body. As I am one with the Father, you can be one with me, and we can all be one, the I amness. And in our relationship with God, we start to see that God is love. God is the love that we share. That's how Paul describes it. God is love, the love that flows through us to others to bring us all into that I amness. And our idea of salvation shifts away from the idea of heaven as a separate place to this idea of the kingdom is at hand. The kingdom is here now among us at hand. How many times does Jesus say the kingdom is at hand? The kingdom is now. We pray, may your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Let it be the same. Let it be one. Let it be united. The whole idea of incarnation, of Christ born into our world, walking among us, is to bring that into union and to end separation, polarity, friction, and bring it back into fusion. The whole idea of Eucharist, Christ taking the elements of the earth, the elements of this creation, and sanctifying them, saying, this is me, this is my substance, this is my essence. I break it open, I pour it out, I share it with you, so that you may become it too. With it, that's a very real presence, an immediately present, not a future encounter, but an immediate real presence of Christ coming to us, seeking to work through us as we move on. As we grow deeper in our spirituality, we realize it's not all about us. There are these other people we care about, other people we love, and these people are all created in the image and likeness of God as well. These are our family members and close friends, our tribe, if you will, the people for whom we would literally give our lives. They reveal to us the miracle of shared love, the reality of life-giving love. If these relationships are healthy, they offer a mutuality through which we discover what it means to be in communion with others, to break ourselves open and pour ourselves out for the welfare of another person. These relationships show us that God's love does not only flow to us, it also flows through us. Still, however, at this level of spiritual understanding, we see through the polarizing lens of us and them. Those who are part of our close community or tribe are in the us set, and those who are outside of that circle are in the them set. Love of neighbor is quickly reduced to love of those in the us group, juxtaposed by animosity or fear of those in the them group. The typical Christian response of those who are mired at this level of spiritual development is to go forth and try to make them more like us. I have this conversation in my diocese frequently about what does the word evangelization mean. I'm like, no, it does not mean go out in the world to make them more like us. It means take the substance and the essence of Christ out and meet them where they are, as they are, love them as they are. Change the direction of the flow. Looking at the way Jesus lived his life, especially his open engagement with so many people who were very unlike him, it's difficult to imagine that this is what he envisioned when he instituted Eucharist and said, "Do this in memory of me." The first three ripples of relationship are relatively easy. We are motivated with self-interest to love God, self, and those with whom we are in close relationship. But living in loving communion with total strangers, especially those body-pierced, purple-haired skateboard punks outside my window, well, let's just say it would be so much easier to love them if they would pull their pants up, stand straight, and be more like me. Oops, that sure happened quickly. Living in loving relationship with society, with community, that might be the hardest part of being Christian. In this regard, Eucharist is a tremendous gift, but we have to enter into it fully. I mean, really enter into it, not just scrape over the surface and think we've somehow are righteous because we go to Mass once a week and hang a rosary from the mirror in the car. This brings us into the next inner depth of spirituality, living in real presence with the sacred human dignity of every other person, including those who are not at all like us. The Good Samaritan parable is a great example of how Jesus felt about this. The story's hero is a man of a different ethnic identity and a different religion. In many ways, he would have been considered the enemy. And we are left with a poignant answer to the question, who is my neighbor? The answer, of course, is everyone. Everyone. Every leper, prostitute, tax collector, Pharisee, refugee, Minnesota Vikings fan, every Democrat, NRA member, tree hugger, Muslim, immigrant, Republican, and Kardashian. Every single one. Jesus sought to be in communion with them all. And he never once said, I will love you once you pull up your pants and stand up straight. Do we? Do we? God puts no conditions on love. Christ puts no conditions on love. Do we? Join me, if you will, in the mission prayer. Loving Christ, bread of life, wine of compassion, you broke yourself open and poured yourself out to become one with us, for us, in us, and among us. Open our hearts to love as you love, to forgive as you forgive, to serve as you serve, and to break ourselves open and pour ourselves out for others, bringing your real presence to all God's people all the time. Amen. All right. That went by fast. Well, I thought so. How was your nap? Questions? Comments? Yes, sir.
I wasn't going to bring up football, but you mentioned it. So, being from Green Bay, do you see that as a common thread through all the parishes and all the churches? And do you see some positivity in that? Because it's a pretty unique town as far as football goes.
The question is, does football bring us closer together in Green Bay? And the answer is yeah. One of the things that's beautiful, right? I mean, you go to Lambeau Field on a game day afternoon, and you put 82,000 people in a stadium, and they're all best friends. And outside of that, they come from very different worlds, very different perspectives on life, very different political orientations. But it's like the farmer's market example. That you bring them all in there, and they all become unified and one. Now we can talk about the ethics of the NFL. That's a different topic, but at least in that episode, it does bring a certain degree of communion with the people. And the people in Green Bay have to tell you, they really believe that the Green Bay Packers represent righteousness. I mean, it's a publicly owned team. We don't have an owner. We're all about the grassroots people rising up, coming together. But But yeah, there can, there's certainly dark sides, but there's a bright side to it. Yeah. Anyone else? I'm going to bring this back. No. Oh, it's off.
I don't know. Okay.
Oh.
Okay. One of the things that you said this at the end about not making the distinction, I brought to mind one of my pastors said, is giving money to the we call them bums or street people. You give them money, and I asked him. I said, "Do you give money to the bums?" And he goes, "Well, we can't because our diocese just gives a credit card. You can't give a homeless person credit card." I said, "But if you had money, would you give it to them?" And he said, "Sure." And I said, "Even though you know how they're going to spend it?" And he goes, "Yep." He says, "Because God didn't say, give to the poor and this is how I want you to spend it." So I took that to heart. And the way that the Lord works, I was stopped at a rest stop. And all of a sudden, there was this homeless guy. He set up a table and chair right there at the rest stop. And I felt the Lord say, "Go give him money." So I went back to my car. I said, "The Lord told me to give you this money." He goes, "Oh, thank you. But he also told me he's watching how you spend it."
We flowing through it, and the how you spend it is a qualification. Now we have to be stewards of our resources. We have to use them in a way that's going to do the most good. But there's a question that comes before that, and it's what shares the most love? What's going to allow this other person to feel like valued? I told you the story last night of my own focus being corrected, being said, look into someone's eye, see into their heart, and remind them that they have dignity and value and are loved, and to do that, and that becomes the most critical thing. But I would, the idea of being able to share ourselves with openness, and I know that I myself would rather give money to 10 people who are going to use it, for whatever they use it for, than deny money to one person who needs it, to feed their child. I mean, it's really easy to talk ourselves out of doing things because of what someone else might do.
Deacon, how do you have oneness with people that you really violently disagree with? I was having a conversation with who I thought was a good friend of mine, and he brought up the subject of abortion. And I said, "I can't really believe you love killing babies." He said, "It's not killing babies, it's women's rights." Well, I felt very guilty tonight listening to you because I wasn't in oneness with him at all. And yet I know we shouldn't judge other people, but how do you avoid not to?
Well, first of all, I make sure I don't get into violent disagreements. Look, if you've spent any time on Facebook, you realize that very few things have been reconciled, much less even resolved, through argument. And that isn't how it works. One of the things we seem to really be struggling with in our culture right now is this idea of listening to understand. We listen to respond. We hear what someone's saying. We immediately let it curl the hairs on the back of our neck, and we're eager to respond and set the record straight and correct them. But if we don't think about how we're going to respond if we listen to understand where they're coming from. I think one of the most compassionate things we can do for another person is listen to them and understand them and realize, excuse me, before they get to an issue, there's a heart, there's a disposition, there's something that we can learn from, we can grow from. In my workplace, people are always perplexed when they bring an issue to me, and they're on fire, and I just listen, because I realize that 9 out of 10 times, if you let someone just go long enough, they bring themselves around. They realize that their own position is more nuanced than what they're pretending it is, and they move on. But my response is, how do you be one? Listen to understand them and engage them where they're at, and walk with them forward. Anybody else? Oh, thank you.
You kind of just answered it. I was going to say that this is an election year. We are in a country that seems to be extremely divided. I think that many people have very strong feelings. I know every time I go to confession, I have to confess intemperate speech about people who don't agree with me politically. And it's going to be very painful. Both sides have genuine concerns. But for many of us, there are real moral issues that are going to be decided this year. How do we have compassion when we strongly disagree and we think that people are doing things that are really bad for other people that we want to protect?
So most often, with so many of the issues that we're debating in our culture, in our church, and by the way, how many of you who have ever been in a committed relationship with another person who you love deeply disagreed with them on something? So we're all capable of disagreeing with others and still loving them. We disagree with our children, we disagree with our spouses, we disagree with our neighbors. We all have experience. We're all capable of disagreeing with people, but not compromising the love we have for them, still seeing their value and their dignity. And so when we lead with love and we start with love and we realize that how am I affecting them? I'm going to give them an experience of love and allow whatever conversion happens to happen within them. God takes care of that. Christ knows what Christ is doing, and to do that. But I want to go back to the story of the Pharisees bringing a woman caught in adultery, right? So many of the issues that we are at loggerheads with each other about are forced choice fallacies. We've bought into the idea that there's option A, option B, right and left, red or blue. It's, and it's so ridiculous that you've seen, I'm sure many of you have seen the research, well done research, that takes the same issue to a population and says, oh, here is a bill proposed by the party you favor. What do you think of it? And the guy, I love that law. We need to pass that now. And you take that same bill, that same group of people, and saying, here is a bill sponsored by the party you don't like. What do you think of it? I hate it. It's got to be. I mean, we are so jaded and tinted in our lenses because we've bought into this forced choice fallacy, this idea that there's polarized or two options only. And Eucharist calls us to wholeness, completeness, oneness, where the idea of a middle ground is irrelevant, because the third choice is not between this fake line of right and left. The third choice is the big picture overall. And we can gain connection with people, not when we tell them that their perspective is wrong and our perspective is right. Excuse, I get choked up about this. Excuse me. But we can gain connection and communion and dignity and restore relationships, when we listen to understand and make love the top priority, but more than anything, realize that the two choices we're forced to choose between are not the only options available. You know, and it's back to, this isn't about convincing other people to think like us. This isn't about, I am recoiling because you just put a lawn sign in front of your house that just absolutely makes me sick, but rather focuses our entire lives on the idea of, how am I affecting you? How is the love I share, the peace I bring, the joy that I celebrate, how is that affecting other people? You know, that doesn't mean that we compromise our convictions or that we go and vote differently or anything else. But in terms of how we engage other people, it's a call to respect the value and the dignity of someone who thinks differently, prioritizes different things, sees differently. Sometimes it helps, like, I'm going to really try not to, get wrapped around political mullings here, but back to those stages of human development, once you're at that pluralistic or hopefully at a universalist perspective, and you're engaging with someone who's still living at that egocentric or individualist place, and you just want to explode. Don't you see? Don't you see? But the reality is, no, they don't. They don't. That's okay. Love them anyway. Love them anyway.
Like, okay, put yourself back in history in World War II in Germany. So you're going to say, we're just going to take, we love the Nazis. We still have to try to love them, and we let them do what they're doing. When do you draw that line and say, hey, you have to stand up for... So when you, the litmus test on everything seems to be, and is what about the Nazis? And look, you do have to stand up for what you believe. You do have to stand up for your conviction, right? Absolutely. And you have to defend the people who need defending. You need to stand up and defend the Jewish people at that time, right? The people who were persecuted, to stand with them and stand beside them and make yourself vulnerable alongside of them. Absolutely. But Jesus forgave the people who nailed him to the cross. I mean, this is a deep, deep level of spirituality. And most of us are going to struggle throughout our lives to even get a glimpse of that. But that doesn't mean we give up on it. We still keep moving toward it deeper, saying, you know what, there are still some people that I don't love. And there are still some people that I struggle to get along with. And there's still sometimes where anger and hate broils up within me. And that's to be human. That's part of our human nature. And to wrestle with that tension and that stress, I think there's value in wrestling with it and saying it and saying, yeah, it's okay. I'm not going to be okay that people are harmed. I'm not going to be okay with the idea that we push children back into the Rio Grande. I'm not going to be, that's wrong. That's awful. It's terrible. I'm not okay with that. And I'm not going to roll over and suggest I am because it might disagree with someone. But But I'm deeply challenged. I'm not even, I'm a hypocrite right now, right? Because I'm talking about an ideal that sometimes I struggle to live up to myself. Can I love Governor Abbott in Texas, right? But that's the call. That's the challenge. That's, to love the people that we disagree with. That doesn't mean that we participate or we endorse or we're okay with any of it. But it does invite us to go deeper and examine, what am I putting into the world? Am I just fueling the anger and the hatred, or am I coming into love? I remember, one of the things, I remember after 9/11, when the towers came down in New York and the Pentagon was hit and the plane went down in Pennsylvania, and I remember so many people around me who were so eager to go off to war. We have to go to Afghanistan. We have to root out terrorism. We have to do this, and I understood why. I didn't necessarily disagree with all of them. I got it. However, the thing about that disturbed me was how excited a lot of people around me were. I thought, if we have to go do this, we should be doing it with a dark cloud over our heads, thinking, oh, I don't want to do this. Is something we need to do, but it's awful and it's terrible. But we were celebrating triumphantly the fact that we're going to go do this, and that disturbed me because we weren't being loving. As a parent raising children, I never was excited that I was going to discipline my kids. It's oh yay, they messed up. Now I'm going to go give it to them. I hated doing it. Still did it because that was my responsibility. But to do it with a loving heart and to feel the pain of engaging in that conflict and that difficulty, it's a really difficult moral question. But I think Eucharist calls us to spend our lives pursuing it, even though, and to not give up just because we can't get there all the time, to keep doing it. On that happy note, does anyone have anything positive to say, anything joyful?
On that happy note, we do have brownies in the cafe. But again, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. And Deacon Steve still has some more books I think Mary's got available in the foyer. And the principal book, though, you can get through Amazon overnight. They can send it to you. So tomorrow night, we will begin at the same time, but we will be beginning with our what we call Taizé prayer. And so it is what we do every Wednesday. And so we didn't want to not do that. So it'll be maybe a little shorter, a little tighter, and then Deacon Steve will continue with the mission for the final night. But it's kind of nice because during Taizé, Deacon, we do have exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, so that's part of it. So it helps us focus on that Christ is present sacramentally in the Eucharist, and that we are to carry that and become that. So again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you all tomorrow night. Thank you.